breaking news in the MMA world yesterday, and the news being that George St. Pierre has reached an agreement with the UFC. Who broke the news? Well, none other than Ariel Helwani, of course, of the MMA Beat, the MMA Hour, and at MMA Fighting. And you can follow him, of course, via Twitter at Ariel Helwani. Good morning.
How are you, Tony? Thank you for having me.
Well, thank you for joining us, Marinero, along with Sean Starr and Sean Coleman. We're with you until 10 o'clock. We're your morning show. I know you came out with the story, but I know George's agent, his handlers are saying, well, there's nothing official yet, and we don't really want to comment. So what can you tell us?
Well, I could tell you what I reported yesterday. They've finally come to terms on a new deal. See, the issue was George had some fights left on a contract that he signed back in 2011, but the UFC is a much different place today than it was back then. For example, back then they didn't have a uniform deal with Reebok, which precludes fighters from having their own sponsorships, and George had some of the most lucrative sponsors in the game. Also, they have this out-of-competition anti-doping policy that they've instituted 365, 7 days a week, so that's changed as well from 2011. So a lot has changed. The sport has changed, and he didn't want to fight with his old contract, and they were having issues. He actually declared himself a free agent in late October on my show, and then 2 days later, finally flew to Las Vegas and met with Dana White face-to-face. They cleared the air. They made peace, as George put it. Then he flew to New York 2 days after that to meet with ariel, who's the co-owner of WME IMG, the new owners of the UFC. They tried to make a deal to have him fight in Toronto in December, couldn't make a deal. Then, really after Ronda Rousey lost, things started to heat up. And why is that important to note? Because the UFC needs George now more than ever. They are on a shortage of stars right now. Conor McGregor is on a bit of a hiatus. Rousey may not fight again. Brock Lesnar just retired. John Jones is suspended. They need him now. And then they finally got the deal done.
That's never happened, really. Has it before for the UFC that they really needed a star because there was a shortage? Like, it seemed like the UFC could have guys fight each other like every couple of weeks, and they would have enough guys.
Well, the sport is very cyclical, as is boxing. Every few years, as you may, hear from time to time, boxing is dead, and then they'll come back. The fight game is cyclical. People don't necessarily go to watch fights or buy pay-per-views because of who the promoter is, contrary to what the UFC might think. So, for example, if the Canadians are having a horrible year, they're still going to sell a lot of tickets because that's the brand. People are going to watch the Canadians play. It's different in the fight game. Stars come and go. So right now they're on a bit of a downturn, and it doesn't come at the best time possible because, as I mentioned, they have new owners and they paid a lot of money, $4.025 billion for the UFC back in August. And also, their United States television deal is up in less than 2 years. So they need to have some big players involved to let the new, prospective, TV partners know that, look, we're still very much in the game. The issue is, right now you look at 2017, where's the $1 million pay-per-view draw? In 2016, they had their best year ever. They had 5 pay-per-views that did over 1 million buys. As of right now, there isn't one on the horizon, especially with Conor and Ronda gone. So like I said, that helped George immensely, and it kind of forced them to all sit down and hammer out this deal finally.
Considering, as you said, the UFC is desperate, could George be making more money in this contract than he's ever made before in the UFC?
And by the way, I appreciate, and like Mark Bergevin said, you ask good questions, Tony. I appreciate the question. But I don't think I said the word desperate. I just want to make, because people run with those headlines. They need him, but the company is not going to implode if they don't have him. You get what I'm saying? I mean, it's good to have him, but they will still figure out a way. They've had downturns before, so yeah, it's possible. Certainly, I mean, he's made some good money back in the day. Here's the key for George. He's not a champion right now. And in the UFC, in the sport of MMA, that's when you make your most money, because when you're a champion, you get pay-per-view points. You just stand to make more than the non-champions, even if the non-champions are, potentially popular than the champions, so to speak. So he needs to get into a title fight. He needs to get a belt, and that's when he's really going to start to make more money. It is also important to note that the sport, the top draws, and that's thanks in large part to Conor McGregor. The top draws are making more money now than they ever were before, including 3.5 years ago when George was around. So yes, if he wins a belt, if he starts to go on a bit of a roll, I do believe he'll make more money now than he did back in the past.
What would be the fight if George would come back that mixed martial arts fans would want to see?
That is a fascinating question because, like I said, he wants a belt. Right now, he's considering 170 pounds and 185 pounds. The current champions in those divisions right now, 185, Michael Bisping, 170, Tyron Woodley. Tyron Woodley's fighting in less than a month in Las Vegas against Stephen Wonderboy Thompson, so who knows what happens there. He's obviously not coming back in the next 3 weeks. Michael Bisping has said repeatedly that he wants to fight George St. Pierre, and George St. Pierre has said that he wants to fight Michael Bisping. It's an opportunity to be just the fourth person in UFC history to hold the title in 2 different weight classes. It's a new, sort of challenge at 185. He always fought at 170, but Michael Bisping has sort of a fight on the table against a guy named Yoel Romero, who's a very scary individual, and no gimme fight. So I think it really all depends on who's the champion when he's ready to fight. Right now, they're targeting a third quarter return, perhaps in Toronto. Nothing has really been finalized, honestly, regarding his opponent, return date, etc. There has been talk of Anderson Silva. Anderson Silva just returned this past weekend. Didn't look like his usual self, but, won a fight, which I actually thought he didn't deserve to win, but there's always been this sort of teasing of a fight between him and Anderson Silva. The problem with that is Anderson's not a champion. There's also Nick Diaz out there. He's had a long history with him. And the Conor McGregor fight has been kind of floated out there as well. I think just having George back against Mr. X is great for everyone involved, but I would be very surprised if in his return fight he's not fighting for a belt.
All right, Conor McGregor and Floyd Mayweather. It looked like a couple of days ago, it looked like this was going to happen. Everyone was talking about it, and then all of a sudden, Floyd sends out a tweet to Conor saying, you know what, you talk to your people at the UFC and then make them call my people, and we'll go from there. So is it or isn't it?
Can I ask you a quick question before I answer that?
Sure.
How big of a deal is George's return to the Montreal sports scene? Because I know yesterday was a big deal in the sports scene here.
Yeah.
But I've often felt that he is the most underappreciated athlete in the history of Montreal sports, arguably the greatest fighter ever, and the guy can't get like a brief mention on the front page of the Montreal Gazette sports section. Does anyone care about this, or does he still not get the respect that he deserves around here?
Well, so to answer that, we at TSN 690 definitely care, and that's why we reached out to the best, which is you, to get you on the line today.
Sure.
That's number one. Number two, yeah. The timing of the situation obviously couldn't be worse because the Montreal Canadiens just relieved the coach of their duties and brought in another one. If it would have been a slow hockey day, it would have got a few more mentions. But is he underrated and underappreciated in this city and in this province? In my opinion, 100% yes, without a doubt. Without a doubt.
Yeah, I wish they would get behind. I mean, the hardcores come and buy tickets when he fights, but this guy is, really top 3 greatest of all time ever, no matter the era, period. And I wish people would get behind him more. But anyhow, to get back to your question about Floyd and Conor. So Conor is in Las Vegas right now. He is trying very hard to get this deal done. He flew to Las Vegas because the Nevada Athletic Commission fined him for this incident that he had prior to UFC 202 with Nate Diaz, where they were throwing water bottles at each other at a press conference. So they fined him, gave him community service, all this stuff. He felt like the penalty was too stiff. So they're going to have a rehearing for his case in late March. After that is kind of, settled, and they'll come to some kind of an agreement. He's going to apply for a boxing license in the state of Nevada, and then he wants to really sit down with Floyd Mayweather's team and hammer out a deal, and then he wants to bring in the UFC. Floyd's saying go to the UFC first because you work for them. He tries to belittle Conor a little bit when saying this, and of course the UFC is not going to let him just go box, Floyd Mayweather without their consent. So there's a lot of hurdles. I mean, there's an immense amount of hurdles to overcome in order to make this fight happen. But I can tell you that Floyd wants it. Conor certainly wants it. He is focusing all of his energy on this fight. And the UFC, as we mentioned earlier, needs big money fights. They need to make money. They could stand to make a hell of a lot more money on this fight, even if they're, part of a 3-man co-promotion, if you will, than, some random pay-per-view. So there's a lot of important people that need to sit down and figure this out. But any report stating that this is a done deal is just absolute false at this time.
Appreciate taking the time. Thanks so much. Always fun talking with you.
Always a pleasure, guys. Thank you.
All right.